Picture this. You've just woken up, really woken up. The riddle solved, suffering dropped. What's your next move? Most masters raise monasteries and schools. Milarepa chose caves barely big enough for one person. Torn robes, empty hands, and still shaped Tibet's most influential lineage. But wait until you hear this part. Traditional accounts tell us that people would risk death climbing treacherous mountain passes, avalanche zones, and killing altitude, all for a chance to sit on frozen stone with this skeletal figure who possessed nothing, yet radiated something that transformed everyone around him. One merchant traveled 3 weeks through passes that kill the unprepared. Why? He'd heard rumors of a yogi whose voice could heal wounds doctors couldn't even find. This sounds insane until you understand how authentic spiritual authority actually works, not through golden temples or formal credentials, but through something far more dangerous and far more effective. Complete transformation that spreads like wildfire from person to person. Think about it. In our age of social media influencers and fake gurus, what would real spiritual power actually look like? Welcome back to Buddha's Wisdom. I'm Matt, and we're witnessing the most revolutionary phase of Milarepa's journey. Last episode ended with that incredible moment, the skeletal figure facing supernatural demons, his voice becoming song for the first time, achieving the enlightenment that transformed a killer into a saint. But here's what nobody tells you about awakening. It's not the finish line. It's when your hardest work begins. Because what do you do when you've solved the ultimate riddle? When you've transcended personal suffering and realized the nature of existence itself? Awakening isn't a retirement plan. It's where the real work begins. Far to the west, a black pyramid of ice, Mount Kailash, waits. But first, what does service look like after enlightenment? Today you'll discover how one awakened hermit created a spiritual revolution without building a single temple. How his spontaneous songs became more powerful than written scriptures, and why his approach challenges everything we think we know about how wisdom spreads. You'll meet the partnership that preserved his teachings for centuries, witness viral awakening before social media existed, and understand what's at stake when two completely different visions of spiritual power prepare to collide. This isn't just ancient history. This is about what authentic transformation looks like and how it changes everything around it. After enlightenment, Milarepa faced the choice that would redefine Buddhist history: build impressive institutions or trust awakening to spread through direct contact. He made the radical choice: complete authenticity over impressive appearances. The life of Milarepa preserves accounts of seekers traveling for weeks through terrain that regularly killed unprepared travelers. Altitude sickness that turns your brain to mush. Frozen streams where one wrong step means plunging into killing cold. Avalanche zones where entire mountainsides could bury you without warning. Why would rational people risk death for uncomfortable cave conditions? Picture the reality. His retreat carved into rock faces where ice formed on walls each night. No heating system, no comfort amenities. Wind cutting through cracks like frozen knives. Yet when this scarred, weathered figure spoke, his voice carried something that bypassed every intellectual defense and reached straight into your core. Unlike established teachers with scheduled dharma talks and systematic curricula, his method was completely spontaneous. Each visitor received teaching perfectly calibrated to their specific spiritual needs. Here's what blew my mind about his approach. Rather than generic wisdom that applies to everyone, each encounter was like precision surgery for individual souls. Traditional accounts describe this pattern repeatedly. Someone arrives carrying a specific type of suffering, and Milarepa's response emerges as spontaneous verse that addresses exactly what that person's path requires. The teaching might sound like this, though we're paraphrasing from traditional sources. You search distant caves for treasure you already carry. This stone shelter owns nothing, yet lacks nothing. Find the wealth that needs no objects. But here's what made this different from ordinary religious instruction. Something extraordinary happened. Not intellectual understanding, but direct recognition. Glimpses of inherent completeness that no external achievement had ever provided. Students didn't just memorize verses, they carried living transmission home, sharing awakened presence rather than doctrine. This approach proved something revolutionary about authentic spiritual authority. Real power comes from obvious transformation, not impressive buildings or formal credentials. And here's the kicker. This seemingly isolated hermit was actually creating the most effective spiritual transmission system possible, because nothing spreads faster than authentic transformation that people can see and feel directly. But how did this organic approach actually preserve teachings across centuries? That's where two extraordinary students made all the difference. Two disciples emerged, whose collaboration would ensure Milarepa's revolution survived beyond his lifetime. And their story demonstrates something crucial about how wisdom actually preserves itself. Meet the lightning and the lighthouse. Rechungpa arrived carrying that rare combination of fierce dedication and spiritual intuition that authentic masters recognize instantly. Traditional sources describe him spending months alone on wind-scoured mountain passes, breath crystallizing in air so thin it burns your lungs, repeating sacred practices until profound silence emerged from the depths of his being. His relationship with Milarepa shattered every conventional expectation about guru-disciple dynamics. Instead of formal hierarchy with rigid protocols, genuine spiritual friendship developed between awakened consciousness and emerging realization. Rechungpa became keeper of the most advanced practices, techniques so powerful that wrong application could fragment your sanity, yet so effective that proper use could produce complete enlightenment within a single lifetime. Their connection transcended normal communication, direct mind-to-mind transmission, awakened understanding flowing wordlessly between teacher and completely trusted student. But watch what happens when Rechungpa achieved his own realization. His awakening somehow enhanced Milarepa's ability to help others. Consciousness, recognizing itself through different expressions. Then came the encounter that would reshape Tibetan Buddhism. Gampopa was already an accomplished Kadampa monk, master of systematic philosophy and disciplined meditation practice. Picture him at dusk, closing elaborate scriptural commentaries, suddenly realizing that perfect theoretical knowledge hadn't produced the direct experience it promised. When stories about this cave-dwelling yogi reached him, immediate recognition struck, not intellectual curiosity about alternative methods, but profound knowing that he had found what decades of scholarly study had failed to provide. Here's what made their meeting historically significant. Consider what each brought to this unlikely partnership. Gampopa offered methodical presentation skills, institutional sustainability knowledge, and credibility within established religious circles. Milarepa provided direct awakening transmission, practices that produced rapid results, and spontaneous wisdom flowing from complete enlightenment. Gampopa's jewel ornament of liberation later documented their exchanges, showing how systematic scholarship and direct realization could enhance each other rather than compete. Through Milarepa's guidance, Gampopa achieved genuine transformation, not academic understanding, but lived realization that revolutionized everything he thought he knew about spiritual practice. This collaboration solved Buddhism's greatest puzzle. How do you systematize enlightenment without killing its spontaneous essence? Rechungpa kept the lightning immediate, preserving fierce intensity for practitioners willing to risk everything. Gampopa built the Lighthouse, creating structured approaches that could safely guide thousands toward identical awakening. But something unexpected was happening to Milarepa himself during this teaching period. Each student he guided toward freedom was transforming him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The hermit who had sought only personal liberation was discovering that his greatest joy emerged from others' awakening. Teaching had become his deepest spiritual practice, refining his compassion and expanding his understanding. This internal evolution would prove crucial for the ultimate test approaching. Here's what amazed me about Milarepa's influence. It spread across Tibet without marketing budgets, missionary campaigns, or institutional recruitment drives. Students simply carried his songs home and shared them naturally. It's like viral content before social media even existed. What made these verses different from ordinary religious poetry? They didn't just convey information. They transmitted actual glimpses of the awakened state that inspired them. Communities reported being transformed by encounters with his teachings. Here's what happened in a region torn apart by generational blood feuds, families destroying each other through inherited hatred. When Milarepa visited and sang about anger's futility, something extraordinary occurred. Both sides experienced immediate recognition of how their rage was annihilating everyone they claimed to protect. The reconciliation reportedly lasted for generations. Word spread about hardened criminals abandoning violence after hearing his teachings about karma's workings, not from fear of punishment, but because the verses awakened inherent compassion the threats had never reached. But wait until you understand the genius of his method. His approach made Buddhism's most profound insights accessible to everyone, regardless of education or social background. Farmers understood emptiness through songs comparing thoughts to clouds passing through unchanging sky. Merchants grasped impermanence through verses about seasons and trade routes. Warriors learned compassion through poetry about protecting rather than conquering. This wasn't accidental simplification. He recognized that awakened consciousness is everyone's natural state, requiring only appropriate conditions to manifest. Students who achieved realization became spontaneous teachers, sharing living wisdom from direct experience rather than memorized scriptures. Think about the revolutionary implications for spiritual authority. Instead of requiring formal conversion to institutional Buddhism, his songs carried enlightenment directly into ordinary life. Call it spiritual contagion. Sit near someone truly awake, and you warm to your own possibility. This pattern continues today. Authentic transformation remains unmistakable, still draws people naturally, still spreads through genuine human contact rather than advertising campaigns. Consider what this means for anyone seeking real spiritual guidance in our current landscape of fake gurus and social media spirituality. Authentic awakening has a recognizable quality that can't be manufactured or faked. But each person Milarepa helped toward freedom was also changing him in profound ways. Teaching others had become his deepest spiritual practice, dissolving more layers of subtle ego and expanding his commitment to universal liberation. The bitter hermit focused on personal escape was evolving into something unprecedented, a master whose only desire was others' awakening. This transformation was preparing him for a challenge that would test everything he'd learned about authentic spiritual power. Here's what blew my mind when I first grasped Milarepa's strategy. He created one of Buddhism's most influential lineages without building a single formal institution. How is that even possible in a world where we assume spiritual movements need organizational structures to survive? The answer challenges everything we think we know about how authentic wisdom preserves itself. When advanced students reached stable realization, they didn't wait for official authorization or institutional approval. Practitioners simply recognized their attainment and began seeking their guidance naturally. These awakened teachers established retreat sites in remote valleys, adapting core methods to their understanding and local circumstances. Each location became a node in an organic network of transmission. Watch how this prevented the institutional corruption that often destroys spiritual movements. In this ecosystem, authority isn't a title, it's a temperature. People feel authentic realization immediately, or they don't. Different disciples specialized in various transmission aspects based on their natural gifts. Rechungpa preserved intensive yogic practices for serious retreatants willing to undergo extreme conditions. Gampopa developed systematic presentations that could interface with established religious institutions. Others carried teachings to different regions, adapting methods while preserving essential insights. This created transmission redundancy through multiple streams rather than dependence on single successors. Think about what this means for modern spiritual seekers navigating religious institutions. Authentic wisdom traditions function like living ecosystems, not corporate hierarchies. They adapt to local conditions while maintaining essential integrity. Here's a concrete example of how this worked. Awakened students created complementary approaches serving different practitioner types: intensive retreats, systematic study, artistic expression, while maintaining one essential realization. The genius of this approach: it proved that genuine spiritual transformation creates its own preservation systems. Real awakening is so compelling, it naturally sustains and propagates itself across generations. When Gampopa eventually established more formal structures, he built upon foundations of authentic realization rather than creating institutional authority first and hoping understanding would develop later. Students achieving obvious awakening naturally attracted serious practitioners, while power seekers found nothing to exploit in such informal networks. The system self-corrected through organic selection. But this organic success was about to face its ultimate test. Ancient powers that had ruled Tibet's spiritual landscape for millennia were watching and preparing to push back against Buddhism's growing influence. The revolution was spreading too successfully to ignore. As Buddhist influence expanded across Tibet, a confrontation became inevitable. The challenge would come from masters of spiritual traditions that had shaped Tibetan culture since before recorded history. Naro Bonchung, accomplished practitioner of Tibet's ancient Bon path, watched communities abandoning shamanic practices that had sustained their ancestors for countless generations. This wasn't personal rivalry between individual teachers. Two fundamentally different visions of spiritual power were preparing to collide, and the outcome would determine Tibet's religious future for centuries. Bon literature and oral tradition speak of extraordinary ritual mastery, weather rites that could summon storms or clear skies at will, spirit mediation, allowing communication with deceased ancestors and supernatural beings, healing ceremonies that restored sight to the blind and strength to the paralyzed. Their spiritual authority had guided Tibetan civilization for millennia. Kings consulted Bon masters before major decisions. Communities depended on their ceremonies for protection from natural disasters and hostile spirits. Now this cave-dwelling Buddhist was attracting their followers with nothing more than spontaneous songs about inner awakening. Naro Bonchung's challenge was as strategic as it was audacious. He claimed ultimate spiritual authority over Mount Kailash, Tibet's most sacred mountain, revered by multiple traditions as the cosmic axis around which the universe revolves. Picture the stakes involved. Kailash represented the spiritual heart of the entire Himalayan region. Whoever controlled it would effectively determine which principles guided Tibetan religious development for generations to come. Buddhism here arrives as insight and compassion. At Kailash, two visions of the sacred meet, and the mountain asks, what is power for? For Milarepa, this created an impossible paradox that struck at the core of everything he'd learned. His entire journey had led away from using supernatural abilities for competition and dominance. Remember part 1? That path had created mass murder and spiritual catastrophe. Yet refusing the challenge might allow approaches emphasizing power over wisdom to dominate Tibet's spiritual future. Countless practitioners could be affected for generations. But something about this confrontation touched deeper layers than competing methodologies. Milarepa had experienced complete transformation from supernatural revenge to enlightened service. His years of teaching had refined this understanding further. Each student he'd guided toward freedom had dissolved more of his subtle ego attachments, expanded his compassion, and deepened his commitment to others' liberation over personal validation. The hermit who had once sought only individual escape had become someone whose greatest joy emerged from others' awakening. This evolution would prove crucial for what lay ahead. As he contemplated the challenge, the ultimate questions arose. If he refused, wisdom might lose its foothold in Tibet for centuries. If he accepted, he risked betraying everything enlightenment had taught him about the futility of spiritual competition. But there was something else, something his extraordinary perception was beginning to sense about this contest. Naro Bonchung didn't just claim spiritual authority. He could demonstrate it in ways that would make Milarepa's quiet songs look powerless by comparison. Stories spoke of him summoning massive storms at will, flying through the air faster than eagles, commanding armies of spirits that could level mountains. If he displayed such abilities at Kailash, while Milarepa offered only inner wisdom, Buddhism might lose all credibility in Tibet forever. Worse, his students who had trusted in the power of compassion might face persecution or exile. The songs that had healed communities could be silenced. Everything Milarepa had built through years of patient teaching could crumble in a single demonstration of supernatural force. The ancient shamanic powers weren't just gathering, they were preparing to prove that supernatural force trumps enlightened consciousness. What happened at that black pyramid of ice would determine whether Tibet's future belonged to external power or internal transformation. And Milarepa was about to discover that sometimes, proving wisdom requires facing forces that could destroy everything he'd built. How do you prove that wisdom surpasses supernatural power without using those very abilities to make your point? That's the ultimate paradox waiting at Mount Kailash. How do you demonstrate authentic spiritual authority without betraying the humility that discovered it? If this journey from enlightened hermit to reluctant champion has captured your imagination, subscribe for the most extraordinary spiritual showdown ever recorded. Drop one insight from today's episode that you'll carry like a song this week. And let's get philosophical. What do you think real spiritual power looks like in our modern world? Dazzling displays that impress crowds, or quiet transformation that changes lives? Comment below, and let's discuss. Because what happens at Mount Kailash will completely redefine your understanding of authentic power. To be continued in Part 5, the Flying Contest.